The first sign that my life was about to change was a single sheet of paper. It was lying on my pillow when I came home late one Thursday evening. The house was quiet. Outside my bedroom window, palm trees moved gently in the warm Florida breeze, and somewhere in the distance I could hear the ocean. At first, I thought it was a grocery list. Then I saw my name. Mom. I picked up the paper and unfolded it. The message was short. Mom, I need you to understand something. You can't keep planning your future around us. We have our own family now. Our own responsibilities. You need to start making plans for yourself. I read it twice. Then I folded the paper carefully and placed it on my nightstand. I didn't cry. I didn't storm into my son's room. I didn't call anyone. Instead, I changed into my pajamas, turned off the lamp, and went to sleep. And strangely enough, I slept better than I had in months. My name is Evelyn Harper. I'm 68 years old. I've been a widow for 7 years, and I recently retired after 32 years working as an administrator at a public high school. Working with teenagers taught me many things. But the most important lesson was simple. When someone expects you to react emotionally, silence can sometimes be the strongest answer. At 7 the next morning, I called my attorney. By noon, my estate documents had been reviewed. And by the end of that conversation, my son, Mason Harper, was no longer listed as the executor of my estate. At 2 that afternoon, Mason showed up at my house. He didn't knock. He pushed through the front door, breathing heavily. Mom, what did you do? I was standing in my kitchen, making iced tea. I don't know what you're talking about, I said calmly. My attorney called me. He said you changed your will. I dried my hands and walked to my bedroom. Then I returned with the folded note. I handed it to him. Mason stared at his own handwriting. His face slowly changed. Mom. I looked at him. You told me to stop planning my future around you. He opened his mouth. I continued. So I decided to take your advice. He looked confused. I don't understand. I smiled gently. You said you have your own family now. I paused. So do I. For the first time, Mason had nothing to say. And that was when I realized something. The note hadn't broken my heart. It had finally opened my eyes. Because 6 years earlier, I had made a decision that would change everything. I had given my son and his wife something they never expected. I had given them my home. And, without realizing it, I had given them far more than that. 6 years earlier, Mason and his wife, Lauren, had been struggling. They were expecting their first child and living in a small apartment in Clearwater, Florida. The rent kept increasing, Lauren had stopped working, and Mason was doing everything he could to keep up with the bills. One evening, Mason called me. Mom, I don't know what we're going to do. I remember the worry in his voice. I had spent my entire life saving carefully. My husband, Daniel, had always told me that money was meant to create security, not fear. So I offered them something I thought would help. I owned a beautiful property about 20 minutes from the Gulf. It had a spacious 3-bedroom house, a screened-in porch, a swimming pool, and a detached guest cottage surrounded by palm trees. The cottage wasn't luxurious, but it was comfortable. I decided to move into it. Then I gave Mason and Lauren the main house. Rent-free. You can stay there until you're back on your feet, I told them. Lauren cried when I gave them the keys. Mason hugged me so tightly that I could barely breathe. You have no idea what this means to us, Mom. At the time, I believed them. The arrangement was supposed to last 2 years. They would pay their own utilities, groceries, insurance, and other household expenses. I would live quietly in the cottage while they saved money for a home of their own. It seemed reasonable. And for the first few months, everything was wonderful. Lauren called me almost every day. Mason would stop by the cottage after work. They thanked me constantly. But gratitude has a strange way of changing when generosity becomes normal. The first thing that changed was the house. Lauren began redecorating. At first, I didn't mind. Then one afternoon, I noticed an old wooden cabinet missing from the dining room. It had belonged to my mother. "Where's the cabinet?" I asked. Lauren barely looked up from her phone. "Oh, that old thing? I donated it. It didn't really fit the style of the house anymore." I stared at her. "You could have asked me." She shrugged. "I thought you'd understand." That was the first time I felt something shift. Then came the babysitting. At first, I loved spending time with my grandson, Noah. But eventually, the visits stopped being invitations. They became assumptions. I'd open the cottage door at 7 in the morning and find Noah standing there with a backpack. "Mason?" "Oh, he had to leave early," Lauren would say over the phone. No request. No warning. Just an expectation that Grandma would handle it. I tolerated it because I loved that little boy. And because every time I tried to set a boundary, Mason would say the same thing. "Mom, we're just going through a difficult period." So I helped. Again. And again. And again. Until 6 years had passed. The house that was supposed to be temporary had become theirs in their minds. And the cottage where I lived was slowly becoming an inconvenience. I first realized that one sunny afternoon. I was watering the hibiscus plants near my porch when I heard Lauren talking with two of her friends beside the pool. "I keep telling Mason that eventually we should use the cottage," she said. I stopped watering. One of her friends laughed. "For what? A home gym, maybe. Or an office. It's just sitting there." Lauren lowered her voice. "Camille is getting older. Eventually she'll want something smaller anyway." I stood completely still. They were talking about my home as though my future had already been decided. And Mason was standing right beside them. He didn't say a word. That silence hurt more than anything Lauren had said. Now, 6 years later, I finally understood what that silence meant. And the note on my pillow had given me the answer. If my son wanted me to stop planning my life around him, I would. But I was about to take that decision much further than either of them expected.
The following Monday, I made the first real change. I sat at my kitchen table before sunrise with a cup of coffee, my laptop, and the note Mason had left on my pillow. I read it one more time. Then I opened my bank account. For years, I had quietly paid several expenses connected to the main house. When Mason and Lauren first moved in, I had set up automatic payments for the internet, lawn service, pool maintenance, and water. It was supposed to be temporary. 6 years was no longer temporary. I canceled every payment. Then I opened the family phone account. Mason and Lauren were both on my plan. I removed them. Finally, I called my insurance company. The SUV Mason drove was registered in my name. I had bought it 3 years earlier after his old car broke down. He had promised to replace it himself once his finances improved. That never happened. So I made another decision. I was taking the vehicle back. When I finished, I stared at my laptop screen. I expected guilt. Instead, I felt relief. For years, I had confused loving my family with carrying them. They weren't the same thing. That afternoon, I sat on my screened-in porch and listened to the palm trees moving in the wind. For once, I didn't feel responsible for fixing anyone's problems. The next morning, Mason came rushing into the cottage. "Mom." I looked up from my coffee. "Good morning." "My phone doesn't work." "I know." He stared at me. "You canceled it?" "I removed you from my plan." "And the internet?" "That account is yours now." His face became red. "You can't just do this." I calmly placed my coffee on the table. Actually, Mason, I can. We have a child. And 2 working adults. He looked stunned. Why are you suddenly acting like this? I held his gaze. I'm not acting differently. I'm simply listening to what you told me. What are you talking about? I reached for the note. You told me to stop building my future around your family. He looked away. Mom, that wasn't what I meant. Perhaps you should have been more careful with your words. Before he could answer, Lauren appeared at the cottage door. She didn't knock. She never did. Camille, what did you do? I removed your phone from my account. She crossed her arms. You know we have expenses. So do I. Her expression hardened. You're being petty. I smiled. No. I'm being responsible. She looked toward Mason. He said nothing. Then Lauren said something that changed the atmosphere completely. If you keep treating us this way, don't expect to see Noah this weekend. There it was. The threat. For years, my grandson had been the easiest way to control me. Whenever I disagreed with them, Lauren knew exactly what to say. But this time, I didn't react. I picked up my coffee. That is your decision as his mother. Lauren stared at me. She had expected me to panic. Instead, I turned toward the window. Have a nice day. She walked away without another word. I watched her cross the lawn. Then I looked at the cottage door. For the first time, I realized something important. A boundary only works when you are willing to enforce it. And I had finally become willing. The next morning, I made another decision. I was going to reclaim my space. For years, Lauren had treated the cottage as though it were an extension of the main house. She borrowed things without asking. She opened cabinets. She took food from my refrigerator. Sometimes she would walk through my front door simply because she needed something. I had tolerated it for far too long. That Saturday, I drove into town and bought new locks. When I returned, I replaced both the front and back door locks myself. It took me less than an hour. When I finished, I stood on the porch and looked at the new deadbolt. It was a small piece of metal. But to me, it meant something much bigger. This was my home. A few hours later, I heard footsteps outside. The door handle moved. Then it moved again. Camille? Lauren. I didn't answer immediately. Camille opened the door. I walked to the entrance but didn't unlock it. What do you need? I have an appointment. I need you to watch Noah for an hour. I'm not available today. There was a long silence. Then Lauren's voice became sharper. You're inside. Just open the door. No. You're being ridiculous. I smiled to myself. My home isn't a drop-off center, Lauren. I heard her heels moving away from the porch. A few moments later, the main house door slammed. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. That evening, Mason knocked on my door. This time, he actually knocked. Mom, can we talk? I opened the door. He looked exhausted. Lauren is furious. I imagine she is. She says you're trying to punish us. I'm not. Then what are you doing? I looked at him for a moment. I'm learning how to live without being responsible for everyone else's choices. He lowered his eyes. I don't know why you're making everything so difficult. I almost laughed. I'm not making it difficult, Mason. I'm simply no longer making it easy. He didn't respond. After a few seconds, he walked away. I closed the door. That night, I sat outside on the porch. The Florida air was warm and humid. The sound of crickets filled the darkness, and somewhere beyond the trees, I could hear waves rolling toward the shore. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of what would happen next. I was curious. The following week, something unexpected happened. I received a phone call from my old friend, Patricia. She had been a real estate agent for nearly 30 years. We hadn't spoken in months. "Camille," she said, "how are you?" "I'm better than I was." She laughed. "That sounds like a story." "It is." I told her everything. Not because I needed someone to take my side. I simply needed to say it out loud. When I finished, Patricia was quiet for several seconds. Then she asked one question. "What do you actually want?" I looked through the window toward the main house. For 6 years, I had been asking myself what Mason needed. What Lauren needed. What my grandson needed. I had almost forgotten to ask what I needed. "I want a fresh start," I said. Patricia immediately understood. "Are you thinking about selling?" I looked around my little cottage. Then toward the pool. Then toward the house that had once felt like a gift and now felt like a burden. "Yes." She took a breath. "Then we should talk." The next morning, Patricia came to my house. She walked through the property slowly. She inspected the main house, the cottage, the pool, the yard, and the screened porch. Finally, she turned to me. "Camille, you have something very valuable here." I smiled sadly. "I have a headache." She laughed. "No. You have a property people will fight to buy." I looked toward the main house. "And what happens to Mason and Lauren?" Patricia's expression became serious. "That depends on the legal arrangement they have with you." "They don't have a lease." She nodded. "Then you need to speak with your attorney before doing anything." I already planned to. For once, I wasn't going to make an emotional decision. I was going to make a careful one. Because this time, I wasn't simply taking something away from Mason. I was finally choosing something for myself. That afternoon, I called my attorney. His name was Robert Ellis, and I had trusted him for more than a decade. I explained everything carefully. The note. The bills. The vehicle. The way Mason and Lauren had slowly started treating my property as though it belonged to them. And finally, the conversation I had overheard beside the pool. Robert listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked one question. "Are you certain you want to sell?" "Yes." "Then we'll do this properly." That sentence mattered to me. I wasn't interested in revenge. I didn't want to throw my son out in anger. I wanted to make a decision that protected my future. Robert explained the legal steps I needed to follow. Because Mason and Lauren had been living in the house for years, I couldn't simply tell them to leave overnight. Even without a formal lease, there were rules I needed to follow. So I agreed to follow every one of them. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table and signed the documents. Then Patricia began preparing the property for sale. The house was going to be listed. All of it. The main house. The cottage. The pool. The yard. Everything. When Patricia left, I sat alone for a while. I expected sadness. Instead, I felt something unexpected. Excitement. That afternoon, I walked through the cottage and started opening old boxes. I found photographs of my husband, Daniel. One showed us standing on the front porch on the day we bought the property. We looked so young. So hopeful. Daniel had one arm around my shoulders, and I was holding a bouquet of flowers. I sat down on the floor with the photograph in my hands. For a long time, I simply stared at it. "This was supposed to be our happy place," I whispered. Then I looked around the cottage. Perhaps it still could be. Just not in the way I had imagined. The following Tuesday, a real estate photographer arrived. He took pictures of the house, the pool, the palm-lined driveway, and the screened porch. Mason noticed almost immediately. He came outside while the photographer was working. "What is happening?" I looked at him. "I'm selling the property." His face went completely still. "You're what?" "Selling it." "You can't." "I already spoke with my attorney." He shook his head. "Mom, this is our home." I answered quietly. "No, Mason. This is my property." Lauren appeared behind him. "What did you just say?" I turned toward her. "I said I'm selling the house." Her face became pale. "You're throwing us out?" "No." I paused. "I'm selling my property." "You will have the notice period required by law to make other arrangements." Lauren stared at me as if she had never seen me before. "But where are we supposed to go?" I looked at Mason. Then at Lauren. "That is something you need to decide." Mason stepped closer. "You're doing this because of that stupid note." I shook my head. "No. I'm doing this because of everything that happened after it." He didn't understand. So I explained. "For 6 years, I gave you a home because I wanted to help you build your future." I looked toward the main house. "But somewhere along the way, you stopped building your future and started building it around what I owned." Mason's expression changed. I continued. "And I allowed that to happen." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Lauren whispered. "This is cruel." I looked at her calmly. "No, Lauren." I pointed toward the house. "What's cruel is making someone feel like a guest in her own home." Then I walked back into the cottage. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. The days that followed were surprisingly quiet. I expected arguments. I expected angry phone calls, accusations, maybe even tears. Instead, Mason and Lauren became distant. They began spending more time inside the main house, talking in low voices. I could see them through the windows sometimes. Lauren was constantly on her phone. Mason was making calls. For the first time, they were dealing with a problem I wasn't going to solve for them. And I let them. Patricia scheduled the first showing for Saturday morning. I spent Friday cleaning the cottage and organizing my belongings. I didn't need to take everything with me. In fact, I realized I didn't want most of it. I had spent years collecting things because I thought a large home meant a successful life. Now I understood that a peaceful life required much less. On Saturday morning, Patricia arrived with a young couple. They walked around the property, admiring the pool and the tropical garden. The woman stopped outside the cottage. "This is beautiful." I smiled. "It has been my home for 6 years." She looked at me. "Do you live here alone?" "Yes." She smiled warmly. "It feels peaceful." That word stayed with me. Peaceful. I hadn't realized how badly I had missed that feeling. After they left, Patricia looked at me. "They loved it." "Good." She hesitated. "There's something you should know." "What?" "They're considering making an offer." I felt a strange mixture of excitement and sadness. The property had been part of my life for decades. But I knew I was ready. That evening, Mason came to my door. He looked different. Not angry this time. Just tired. "Mom, can we talk?" I invited him inside. He sat across from me. "Lauren thinks you hate us." "I don't hate you. She thinks you're doing this because you're angry." I was angry. He looked surprised. "But I'm not anymore." "Then why sell everything?" I looked out toward the dark garden. "Because I want a different life." He was silent. I continued. I spent years making decisions based on what would help you. I chose this property because I thought it would give you security. I stayed here because I thought being close to you mattered. I looked back at him. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that my life mattered too. Mason swallowed. I'm sorry. I believed he meant it. But I wasn't ready to forget everything. I appreciate that. He nodded. Then he asked quietly. Where will you go? I smiled. I'm not sure yet. You're really going to start over at 68? I laughed softly. Why not? He looked down at his hands. I don't know. That's okay, I said. Neither did I. He stayed for another 20 minutes. We talked about ordinary things. No arguments. No accusations. Just a mother and son sitting across from each other. When he finally left, I stood at the door and watched him walk toward the main house. For the first time, I didn't feel responsible for what happened next. And that was a beautiful feeling. 3 days later, Patricia called. We have an offer. I closed my eyes. How good? Very good. I smiled. Accept it. She laughed. I thought you'd want to think about it. I've been thinking about it for 6 years. There was silence on the other end. Then Patricia said, Camille, are you sure? I looked around my little cottage. At the photographs. At the old furniture. At the palm trees outside the window. Yes. I've never been more sure of anything. And with those words, I officially began the process of leaving the life I had spent years protecting. The sale moved faster than any of us expected. Within a few days, the buyers completed their inspection, the paperwork was reviewed, and the closing date was scheduled. But there was one thing left to do. Mason and Lauren had to move. I didn't pressure them. I didn't remind them every morning. I simply continued packing my own belongings. Strangely, once I stopped worrying about their reaction, packing became almost therapeutic. I found things I hadn't seen in years. Old Christmas decorations. My husband's fishing hat. Photographs from Mason's childhood. A faded postcard from a trip Daniel and I had taken to Key West. I kept the things that mattered. Everything else went into boxes for donation. One afternoon, Mason came to the cottage carrying a cardboard box. What's this? I asked. Some of your things from the attic. I opened it. Inside were several framed photographs and an old wooden jewelry box. I smiled. I thought Lauren threw these away. She wanted to, he said. I looked at him. But I stopped her. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Thank you. He nodded. Then he sat down. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you really happy about leaving? I thought about it. Yes. He looked surprised. I thought you'd be sad. I am. I held the photograph of Daniel in my hands. This place holds a lot of memories. Then why leave? I looked at my son. Because memories don't require me to stay. He was quiet. Then he said, I've been thinking about what you said. Which part? That I stopped seeing your help as a gift. I didn't answer. He continued. I think you're right. Those words meant more to me than he probably realized. But I also know I should have protected you, he added. From Lauren? From both of us. I looked down. He was finally saying the things I had needed to hear for years. I should have told her to stop going into your cottage. Yes. I should have made sure we paid our share. Yes. And when she talked about using your cottage. He stopped. I waited. I should have said something. I nodded. Yes, Mason. You should have. He looked embarrassed. I was afraid of arguing with her. That isn't an excuse. I know. For the first time, I saw the adult man underneath my son. Not the child I had spent years protecting. Not the person I had been financially supporting. Just a grown man realizing that his choices had consequences. The next morning, the moving truck arrived. Lauren barely spoke to me. Mason carried boxes from the house to the truck. I watched from my porch. At one point, my grandson Noah ran toward me. Grandma. I knelt down and hugged him. I'm going to miss you, he whispered. I'll miss you too. Are you moving far away? Not very far. Can I visit? Of course. He smiled. That little boy had never been the problem. He had simply been caught in the middle of decisions made by adults. By late afternoon, most of the house was empty. Mason walked toward my cottage one final time. He stopped at the bottom of the steps. Mom? Yes? I'm sorry. I looked at him. This time, there was no anger in his voice. Only honesty. I know. He nodded. I really am. I stepped forward and hugged my son. It wasn't a perfect hug. It didn't erase 6 years. It didn't fix everything. But it was real. And sometimes real is enough. The moving truck disappeared around sunset. I stood on the porch and watched the taillights become smaller until they finally disappeared around the corner. For the first time in 6 years, the main house was completely silent. No music. No arguments. No children's laughter. No footsteps crossing the yard. Just the sound of the Florida evening. I expected to feel lonely. Instead, I felt strangely peaceful. The next morning, Patricia called. The buyers want to close early. How early? 3 weeks. I smiled. That works for me. I spent those 3 weeks slowly preparing for my new life. I had already decided that I didn't want another large house. I didn't want a swimming pool that needed constant maintenance. I didn't want a guest cottage. And, most importantly, I didn't want a home that made me feel responsible for everyone who lived around me. Patricia showed me several properties. Then she took me to a small condominium near Sarasota. It overlooked a quiet stretch of water. There were large windows, a balcony, and a walking path lined with palm trees. I stepped inside and immediately knew. This one. Patricia smiled. I thought you might say that. The condo wasn't enormous. It didn't need to be. There was a beautiful kitchen, one spacious bedroom, a small office, and a balcony where I could sit every morning with my coffee. For the first time, I was choosing a home based entirely on what I wanted. Not what my son needed. Not what my family expected. What I wanted. The sale of my old property closed on a Friday morning. I signed the final documents and handed over the keys. As I walked through the empty house one last time, memories appeared everywhere. The kitchen where Mason had taken his first steps. The hallway where Daniel had hung Christmas lights every December. The backyard where we had celebrated birthdays. The porch where I had spent countless evenings watching the sunset. I placed my hand on the front door. Thank you, I whispered. Then I walked away. I didn't look back. That afternoon, I drove to my new condo. My belongings had already been delivered. Boxes filled the living room. There was still work to do. But I didn't mind. I opened the balcony doors. Warm air drifted inside. I could hear birds in the trees and water moving gently in the distance. I stood there for several minutes. This was mine. No one expected anything from me here. No one had a spare key. No one would walk through my door without asking. No one would leave a child on my porch because they had somewhere else to be. For the first time in years, my home was simply my home. That evening, I ordered takeout and sat on the balcony. The sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and orange. I thought about Mason. I missed him. Of course I did. Setting boundaries didn't mean I stopped loving my son. It meant I finally understood that love shouldn't require me to disappear. My phone rang. It was Mason. Mom? Hi. Are you settled in? Almost. He was quiet for a moment. Can I come see you tomorrow? I smiled. Of course. Just me? Just you. I think we need to talk. I looked out over the water. I think we do. After we hung up, I stayed on the balcony. I didn't know what Mason wanted to say. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the conversation. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing. I had finally stopped waiting for someone else to give me permission to live my own life. And that was the greatest freedom I had ever known. Mason arrived the next afternoon carrying a small paper bag. I brought your favorite pie. I smiled. You remembered. Of course I remembered. He stepped inside and looked around. The apartment was still half filled with boxes. You really did it, he said. I did. He walked toward the balcony and looked at the water. Mom, this place is beautiful. It is. He turned toward me. You look different. I laughed. Different how? Happy. That word caught me off guard. I hadn't realized it was showing. We sat on the balcony with coffee. For several minutes, neither of us said anything. Finally, Mason spoke. I talked to Lauren. I waited. She isn't happy. I figured. She thinks you ruined our lives. I took a slow breath. I'm sorry she feels that way. She said you abandoned us. I looked at my son. Did I? He didn't answer immediately. No. His voice was quiet. You didn't abandon us. He looked down at his coffee. We got comfortable. I nodded. Too comfortable. We convinced ourselves that because you could help us, you should. I didn't interrupt. And when you stopped helping, we acted like you had betrayed us. He swallowed. That wasn't fair. No, I said softly. It wasn't. He looked toward the water. I'm going to find another job. You already have one. I mean a better one. I smiled. That's good. I want to pay my own bills. That's better. He laughed quietly. Then his expression became serious. I don't want Noah growing up thinking it's normal to take from people just because they love you. My eyes filled with tears. That, I said, is the most important thing you've said to me. He reached across the table and took my hand. I've been a terrible son. I shook my head. No. You made terrible choices. He looked at me. What's the difference? Choices can change. We sat there quietly. Then he smiled. Can I ask you something? Sure. Are you really going to travel? I laughed. I think so. Where? I looked out at the horizon. I've always wanted to see the Florida Keys again. Then go. I smiled. Maybe I will. You should. He stood up. I should let you unpack. Before he left, he hugged me. This time, I held him tightly. Mom? Yes? Thank you for finally saying no. I pulled back. He smiled. I know that sounds strange. It does. But I think I needed you to. I watched him walk down the hallway. And for the first time, I understood something I had never understood before. Sometimes loving your children means giving them everything. And sometimes it means taking something away. Not their love. Not their family. But the safety net that prevents them from learning how to stand on their own. That evening, I opened my laptop. I searched for small hotels in the Florida Keys. Then I smiled. My new life had officially begun. 3 months later, my life looked completely different. I had settled into my new condo. Every morning, I woke up early, made coffee, and sat on the balcony. Sometimes I read. Sometimes I watched the boats moving across the water. And sometimes I simply sat there doing absolutely nothing. I had forgotten how wonderful nothing could feel. I also took my trip to the Florida Keys. I rented a small room near the water and spent 5 days exploring places Daniel and I had visited years ago. One evening, I stood on a pier watching the sunset. I thought about the life we had built. About Mason. About the house. About everything I had lost. But for the first time, I wasn't thinking about what could have been different. I was thinking about what could still happen. When I returned home, I found a message from Mason. "Mom, Noah wants to know when he can visit." I smiled. I called him. "Tell him whenever you want." A few weeks later, Mason and Noah came to stay with me for the weekend. Lauren didn't come. Mason said she needed time. I didn't ask questions. I simply opened the door and welcomed them inside. Noah ran straight toward the balcony. "Grandma. Look at the water." I laughed. "Beautiful, isn't it?" He nodded enthusiastically. Mason stood behind him, smiling. Later that evening, after Noah went to bed, Mason and I sat outside. "I got the new job," he said. I smiled. "Congratulations. It pays better." "That's wonderful. And we're renting a small house." I looked at him. "Your own place?" "Yes." He laughed. "It feels strange." "What does?" "Paying for everything myself." I smiled. "You'll get used to it." He looked at me. "Mom, I think I finally understand." "Understand what?" "That helping someone doesn't mean doing everything for them." I nodded. "And loving someone doesn't mean letting them use you." I smiled. "Exactly." He looked toward the water. "I wish I had understood that 6 years ago." "So do I." He laughed softly. Then he became quiet. "Are you happy?" I looked around my balcony. At the little table. The flowers. The warm Florida night. "Yes." "Really?" I smiled. "Really." He nodded. "Then I'm happy too." We sat there in silence. There was no bitterness anymore. No resentment. Just acceptance. The following morning, after they left, I made myself another cup of coffee. I opened my journal. On the first page, I wrote, "I spent 6 years believing that being a good mother meant always saying yes." Then I wrote another sentence. "Now I know that sometimes the most loving thing you can say is no." I closed the journal. Outside, the Florida sun was rising over the water. I took a slow breath. I had lost a house. I had lost the life I thought I was supposed to keep. But I had gained something far more valuable. My freedom. My peace. And most importantly, myself. Sometimes we spend years protecting the people we love, only to realize we've been abandoning ourselves. And sometimes, starting over isn't about losing everything. It's about finally choosing what deserves to stay.